Well, hello everybody on YouTube. Welcome once again to Fandom Fridays, where the show where we take a random fanfic out of a fandom and hope and pray to sweet Celestia that it actually is any good. Now, some of you guys are probably curious as to if I were to ever read, say, a multi-chapter fanfic, what would it look like? What would I do with it? How would I read it? And all that. Well, I already told you that the biggest hint if I'm enjoying the multi-chapter fanfic, is to look for Rei Hino. If Rei Hino pops up on the screen, you could tell I did not have a good time with it, and it deserved to be exercised. But if you see something that actually relates to the fanfic, say like this time we've got an image of Kuina, then you'll know that this is where I actually enjoy it. Like with this particular fanfic, though a bird can't fly, doesn't mean it never will, is an interesting alternate universe. You'll see how this works as I begin to show you some really awesome bits. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy as I bring you Though a bird can't fly, doesn't mean it never will. From here, all of us here at the Treeberry Memorial Library. Though a bird can't fly, doesn't mean it never will. By Flanix. Out on the execution ground, the sun shone down scorchingly. It was that time of day right after midday meal. Citizens of Shelltown would push aside their empty plates and retire for an hour's repose to escape the heat. But out on the execution ground of the Marine base, such creature comforts were but a dream to a miserable figure tied at the stake. It had been 7 days since the incident at the inn where the so-called pirate hunter, Ronor Zoro, had tangled with authority for the sake of a little girl named Rika. As his bad luck would have it, authority came in the form of Helmempo, the snotty, spoiled son of Captain Morgan. My apologies! Who, even more unfortunately, had the town in a grip of iron. In the end, he had been coerced into making a pact with Helmempo. If he survived for the month at the stake, he'd get off scot-free, along with Rika and her family. Helmempo probably didn't believe he would make it, else he would have taken up the offer. But survive he would. He would show them all. At the present moment, though, he wasn't surviving too well. Oh, he was surviving, and even the hunger and thirst was nothing. But the heat was another matter. Stoic as he was, even he was wilting in the unforgiving sun. Mind over matter. The easiest way to endure the torture of the elements was to sleep. Zoro had always been able to sleep almost anywhere, anytime, and it was a skill that served him well now. As he tried to nap, the unbidden image of a girl flashed before him. He dreamt of his childhood, of always trying and never beating his childhood rival. The grueling race to catch up to her skill, even as he raced ahead of the adults in the sheltered world of the dojo. Their 2001st duel out in the moonlight. Kuina's despair at the handicap of being a female swordsman. His own disdain at her attitude and the promise. Promise! That one day, one of us will be the greatest swordsman in the world. He awoke from this brief slumber from the scorching sun once more. This time, he fancied that it was a bit lower in the sky than it had been. The execution ground was still empty, and after the first few days, it was even the curious onlookers had deemed him as an uninteresting object and left him alone. The burning sensation of the sun against his skin caused his brow to furrow. It reminded him too much of what happened to Kuina after that night. Zoro, something happened to Kuina. She had gone to the storeroom to get her whetstone. Indirectly, he felt responsible for what had happened. The duel had been his idea. If he hadn't insisted on real katana, Kuina wouldn't have never had to use hers. It wouldn't have been dulled in the fight, as he wouldn't have felt compelled to sharpen it afterwards. And consequently, she would never have missed her footing on the stairs while carrying a katana in one hand and a lighted oil lamp in the other. Oh, was that, dear readers? Are you saying you knew this story? You know that what happens? Well, my dear audience, this is Elseworlds. where we take the stories and characters you know and love and put them into scenarios that could happen, that should happen, or maybe shouldn't happen at all. You know that Kuina died this night, that in your world, she broke her neck. But in this world, things changed. And the little girl whose neck got broken due to a fall now changes. For luckily, she falls right and avoids a broken neck. Unluckily, the dropped oil lamp shatters and splatters burning oil all over her face. They awoken to the sound of her screams in the night. To her credit, she had the presence of mind not to panic, and even managed to extinguish the flames herself before succumbing to the pain. What she hadn't known then was that the horrifying vision of her immolated visage would be the last thing she would ever see.
Excuse me, are you sleeping?
Zoro was awakened from his fitful sleep by the timid voice of his little girl.
Please don't tell me she snuck back here again. Rika, what are you doing back here?
I brought you some rice water.
Didn't I tell you to stay away?
But,
Stupid brat, get lost!
He was harsh this time, knowing that if she were caught, the consequences would be dire. Predictably, her eyes welled up with tears, and she hurried off without another word.
Sorry, it's for the best, kid.
He muttered to himself as the forlorn girl disappeared into the maze of roads. Dust swirled in the light breeze that mixed with his sweat, offering some slight relief. The sun, relentlessly cruel, continued shining overhead as the seconds ticked by, agonizing slow. 7 days. Only 20 more days to go. What would she have thought of him if she had known he had put himself into this predicament?
Zoro, you idiot! How can you be so careless with your life when we have a dream to fulfill?
Yes, that probably would be the most likely response, and he had said the same thing to her after her accident. And he got in a sharp whack on from his master Koshiro for doing it too. Even years later, he could still feel the bruise from the back of the sword.
I will not die here. I made a promise.
No, even the flames couldn't break his promise, and neither would the whims and fancies of injustice. The wind blew, and there on the execution ground, the sun still shone down scorchingly. Chapter 2. Mosquitoes. If there was one thing Zoro hated, it was mosquitoes. And mosquito bites. He had been injured plenty of times before. Gunshot wounds, broken bones, and more cuts and stab wounds than he cared to remember. After all, it was the occupational hazard of living by the sword and hunting down people who didn't want to die by it. Particularly if the said sword was his. But mosquito bites were irritating. They itched without hurting enough to make it worthwhile. They were like half-hearted attempts at being a real injury. And Zoro despises anyone or anything doing anything half-heartedly. After all, if a man, or a woman, took up a calling or a dream, they had better be prepared to give it their all, else they shouldn't even bother trying. Which was precisely why Helmeppo's attempts at administering a beating to him while he was tied to the stake were annoying him so much. Note, he used the term annoying, not hurting. He doubted that Helmeppo had ever done anything that remotely resembled physical labor other than bully hapless townspeople and marines. As such, his punches and kicks were ineffectual to say the least. In fact, he got pats on the head and congratulatory slaps on the back from his dojo mates that hurt worse than Helmeppo's pathetic efforts. Apparently, the labor was taking its toll on Helmeppo, however, for the Phobos deity had decided to take a respite, wincing at his sore knuckles while mentioning for his pet marines to take over. Now, the marines, they knew how to throw proper punts, Zoro conceded. The sound of knuckles rapping against the wooden door had steadily been continuing for an hour.
Kuina, I know you're in there!
Zoro had always been known for his stubbornness. Kuina's accident 4 months ago hadn't changed anything. Well, perhaps that wasn't strictly true. The dojo hadn't been the same since Kuina's absence. Zoro had gone around every day since with a black armband in mourning of the loss of his friend and rival. In the first few days after the incident, everyone thought that Kuina would die. It certainly would have been a mercy. The flames consumed the top half of her face, much of her hair, and had left her permanently scarred. And most damaging of all, she had lost the use of her eyes. But she survived, and in the midst of a long and hard recuperation, and although it was said that she had been, as whispered round the dojo, permanently crippled, no one had yet to lay her eyes on her, as Kuina had not appeared in public since that day. For Zoro, it was as though she had died anyway. Fighting for him had now lost its savior. Nowadays, when he fought, he only did just enough to win his duels, in contrast to his flamboyant, and over-top, victories of his past. He'd even stopped gloating at his progress, and showing interest in using more swords than his appendices will allow, which worried the dojo master greatly. Gone was the daily anticipation of the never-ending duel rematches between the two rivals. Gone were the moments of spine-chilling awe when the daughter of the dojo master would take on opponents twice her size and thrice her age, and win so easily it looked like she did it with her eyes closed. Members of the dojo missed the morning ritual where Zoro would demand a rematch with Kuina and be taken out in one hit. That particular tradition had gone on for so long that each morning seemed incomplete without it. It took them a while to get used to seeing Zoro without the customary welt on the forehead, where Kuina would have smacked him with her shinai, too. The truth is, without Kuina to aspire to, Zoro was lost. Which was why every day Zoro was at Kuina's house, demanding to see the older girl and be rewarded with stoning silence for his efforts. Yet, he persisted, day after day. It wouldn't be Zoro if he gave up, after all.
You're pretty stubborn, pirate hunter Bono Zoro.
He was bleeding and bruised all over, but he grinned. He won.
I told you, I'm going to survive the month and win the bet!
Helmeppo looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. It seemed like a safe bet to him. But if Zoro fancied that for the first time, the possibility he was going to lose the bet just filtered into the brain of the dense, foppus Nancy boy. Then again, who would have thought obstinacy of his level could exist?
Zoro, just go away.
Things progressed a little. Kuina had actually started responding to Zoro's visits by yelling to be left alone through the screen door. On occasion, she would vary it by throwing things out the window, most frequently shoes. They had an uncanny knack of leaving their treads on his forehead after impact.
Kuina? Do you want a sword fight?
My apologies, I'll never do that again. For this read, dear viewers. She still disallowed anyone other than her doctor and the immediate family to see her. The dojo grapevine whispered it was because her face had been scarred so badly, and she didn't want to see anyone to see it. Zoro knew better. Tomboyish Kuina would have cared little what her looks had been reduced to. In fact, she probably would have welcomed it, since it meant she could cross being a housewife off her list of future occupations to be pressured into, and focused on being a swordsman. No, what had really plunged her into the pit of black depression was the loss of her sight. An extension, the loss of her skills. After all, how could a blind person fight with a sword?
Fight me! You need to start training again!
Zoro kept a watchful eye out for his master. The last time Koshiro had caught him saying something like that was the first and only time Zoro had seen his normally serene swordsmaster fly into a rage. Who knew his sensei could be so scary?
We promised. You can't just run away with it by falling downstairs.
Angry stomping sounds, then a very angry reply.
Shut up! You don't know what it's like! Don't you get it, you thicket? Marble! Can't see anymore. I can't fight. Go away and leave me alone. That's not good enough a reason. Don't use it as an excuse. What would you know, Bakasoro? Why don't you try fighting blind?
He was silent for a while.
Very well. I accept your challenge. What? I'll cut my eyes out and you will do no such thing!
He took off the black cloth that was his morning overhand and tied it over his eyes. It worked very nicely as a blindfold.
Fine. From now on, I'm going to fight every duel blindfolded until you come out there and fight me.
A somewhat shocked silence, then a decisive snort.
You won't last a month. Watch me. I mean, you'll see.
Zoro smacked himself on the forehead. Another day, another attempted beating. Zoro had long figured out that the unlucky pet marines didn't like Helmeppo effort, and only made a big show of striking savagely at him out of fear of their master. Still, even them pulling their punches, it hurt. Helmeppo was another story. He evidently hadn't learned anything from his prior attempts, and his fist bounced off Zoro's forehead without leaving much of an impact. If anything, Zoro suspected the being was so pathetic this time, Helmeppo's tender knuckles were hurting. Kuina always did say he had an exceptionally thick skull, probably developed from the number of times he had whacked it with her shinai, or shoes.
Hey!
Hey, dumbass. His unnerving grin had Helmeppo backing away from his trust self so much it was amusing.
I say you hit like a girl, but that would be an insult to the ones I know.
Whatever happened next, the look of embarrassed outrage on Helmeppo's face was worth it, Zoro decided. It caused something of a sensation when Zoro started flying blindfolded. As expected, he started off by ending every day with bruises from his dueling bouts, which he lost, but with frightening speed he adapted to fighting without sight, and before long he was holding his own matches. Soon after, he began winning. Word got around. Zoro waited expectantly for Kuina to show up and resume her training. But she did not appear. One morning, he faced off against Saga, his sort of replacement sparring partner since Kuina. The anemic junior was a relative newcomer to the dojo, but had shown great determination to improve. In fact, one might say the bubbly junior had a bit of hero worship for Zoro, and what he lacked in skill, he made up for in enthusiasm. As was normal, Zoro took off his blindfold armband, covered his eyes, bowed, and started to duel. He knew instantly something was different. He dueled Saga every day for a month now. The junior's moves had a whole different flow to them. This was hauntingly familiar. It felt more like, before he knew it, a familiar strike that somehow evaded his parry scored a hit on his broad forehead. Zoro went down in a clatter of shinai.
And the winner is...
Zoro whipped off the blindfold in disbelief.
Kuina!
She had grown much thinner since her accident. He almost feared to see her face, but was surprised to see it wasn't as bad as he had been led to believe. The lower half of her face had escaped unscathed, and she had used the white scarf to cover her now useless eyes and the angry red scars that accompanied them. The white blindfolds, in a way, mirrored his own black ones. Her hair was now painfully short, a thrifty blue fuzz that's barely covering her scalp. But it was still Kuina. Saga stood in the sidelines, grinning sheepishly. He had swaddled Kuina at the last minute. It was obviously a planned surprise.
All this time, and you're still weak, Zoro.
The smug grin was back on her face. Everyone waited expectantly.
I demand a rematch!
Zoro roared as the dojo erupted in cheers.
Bravo!
What? I'm cheering too! The days stopped being different now. Blistering sun in the day, mosquitoes buzzing him to distract him in the night. His stomach had stopped rumbling for a while now. Maybe it had resigned itself to the fact that it wouldn't be fed for some time. Sometimes, Dandy Boy Helmeppo and his tag-along Marines would drop by and say hi in their own special way. It provided a break for the monotony, if anything. 12 days to go. It should have been getting easier and easier. He was so close to winning the bet now. Yet it felt like every moment was dragging, and he was making progress at the speed of a den mushi crawling. Zoro and Kuina sat outside the dojo after their morning spar. The silence between them was palpable. For the first time ever, Zoro had won. But Zoro felt like he shouldn't have had. It hadn't been a fair fight. For all the brave words bandied around, it had never been fair since the night Kuina fell downstairs. Sensei, you can't allow Zoro to fight Kuina like that. It's not fair! The cries of his dojo's mates were indignant. They were drowned out by the angry yell of the very irate daughter of the dojo master. I don't want fair! It had been 2 weeks since Kuina had returned to training. Zoro had her blindfolded every morning. It was galling that somehow he had still managed to lose every time. Kuina had more time to get used to fighting without seeing, he supposed. She had tried to duel others as well, but no takers. For some reason, no one dared to. Whether it was because he felt bad dueling a blind girl, or he feared losing to a blind girl, Zoro couldn't decide. His rival had been especially edgy that morning, and after winning her 2,000 and something other battle, she had suddenly exploited him.
When are you going to stop fooling around and start fighting me? Seriously, Zoro!
Affronted, Zoro glared back at her.
What are you talking about? I've been fighting you seriously all this time. No need to rub it in. No, you haven't. You still have a blindfold on. You want me to fight you without it? It wouldn't be fair. I don't want fair. I don't want you fighting me with a handicap, Zoro. If we're going to be the greatest swordsman in the world, none of our opponents are going to care a whit if I'm blind or not.
Zoro fingered the blindfold nervously. He would be a laughingstock. A bully if he did what she wanted of him.
Zoro-kun, please.
Her voice was almost a whisper. It was the first time she had ever called him that. Okay. He raised the blindfold into the air, tied it around his head like a bandana.
I can hear you tying the knots in your blindfold, Zoro. It's not over my eyes. It's on my head.
Zoro patted his new headgear for effect.
This is my promise to you, Kuina. Whenever I wear it on my head like this, you'll know I'm fighting you seriously. If I may stop here, this is one of the things I love about this fanfic, is that it kind of helps give certain reasons for certain bits of Zoro's attire. Like the headband. We all know he wears it to fight seriously, but we are never given for a reason for the show, and I don't remember any SBS saying why Zoro does that. Here, it's kind of nice to give Zoro a reason for why whenever he gets ready to fight seriously, he brings out the headband. Even though 2 years later, he doesn't have his headband anymore. Still, it's kind of a nice little effect that this fic gives. Kudos.
Kuina nodded and smiled.
Don't hold back.
She was still smiling, even after she had lost, and they both went to rest under the cool shade of the tree outside the dojo. It had been a good fight. A real fight, with neither giving an inch.
Hey, Zoro?
He had almost begun to doze off.
Thank you.
And that was that. Mosquitoes. At present, the annoying ones were buzzing around his head like a dark, humming cloud that were the focus of his ire. The looks could kill. The particular one that had settled on his arm and was happily feeding on his blood would have been dead 10 times over. Someday, Zoro vowed. Someday he would be so powerful, he would be able to kill with just a look. A fearful yammering from the direction of the wall attracted his attention. 2 heads were peering over the wall and unabashedly staring at him. Well, one of them was anyway. This other looked so terrifying it was bobbing up and down in agitation, reminding him of a coconut set adrift on the top of the ocean. That would be one belonging to the chubby, little, bespectacled boy with a shock of hair so pale it could be described as pink. The other head belonged to a lanky youth with a straw hat jammed tightly on his head. Even as Zoro's eyes narrowed, the youth saw that he had his attention and flashed him the biggest ear-to-ear grin that he had ever seen. More brats came to ogle at the Demon Pyre Zoro. Stupid kids probably dared each other to do it. A faint bulged in his forehead as he glared at them in annoyance. Then Zoro realized anew, if there was one thing he hated. Come on, no! It was... Rocket! Mosquitoes!
Wanted! Wanted! Da 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 da! Wanted! Wanted!
Well, let's see. I'm only 23 minutes in. One more chapter! Chapter 3. The Kimono Maker's Apprentice. The lone traveler paused and looked up to the house where the poles upon poles of brightly covered silk fluttered in the breeze. The kimono maker's house by the river was a large but modest affair, strategically placed along the river where there was easy access to water for washing of the fabrics. Despite its unassuming appearance and remote location on the outskirts of Shimonosuke village, it was revered for the fine kimonos it produced. Indeed, traders often traded for the exquisite garments which found a brisk trade in the Four Blues and even the Grand Line. The kimono maker herself was simply known by the name of Ichi. Ichi? Clever. Real clever. And on this day, she stood on the threshold of the house, overseeing the work of her workers and ensuring everything went well. It wasn't long before she sensed the approach of the traveling trader in his empty cart.
Kuina,
She called out to her apprentice who was in the sewing room.
Saito-san is here. Bring along the new kimonos to show him.
The young woman carefully put down her needle and the kimono she was working on, made her way to the storeroom where rows of lacquered boxes were arranged neatly on the shelves. Of course, she knew very well which kimonos the new kimonos referred to. Had she not sewed them herself? The sky blue Pachov and with a pattern of cirrus clouds and cranes on the third shelf on the right. The gorgeous homogi, which boasted a power of orchard flowers, yet with a myriad colors to appear not garish befitting for an older woman. And the one was in the lower bottom shelf with the other homogis. Lastly, her favorite was stored in a black box on the center shelf. Was an exquisite furosode made of fine grayed water silk, which shimmered in blue in certain lights and grayish black in the others. It was like the ocean itself. In fact, she had patterned it on that the entire kimono was a map of them, like the four blue seas, and the obi would be tied where the calm belts in the grand line would be. Even as she thought about them, her hands sought them out on the shelves with the senses that were not touch, sight, smell, or taste. She had never seen the colors of her work, but she knew they were there, and every stitch would have been there in the correct place. The sense that enabled her to do this was closer to sound, but it was not the different sounds she listened to, but the different types of silence that let her sense what her eyes could not. It was for this skill that Kuina had sacrificed the past few years of her life as a kimono maker's apprentice. Wait, Saito, Ichi, Saito... Clever! To the rest of the village, it seemed that the tomboyish daughter of Koshiro, the dojo master, had finally grown up, and settled into the life befitting of a young woman with poor prospects of marriage. Given that she was free of her sight, it was a wise decision, they said. But Kuina knew better, and bided her time. After all, she made a promise. It had been an accepted fact for some time now that Zoro had surpassed Kuina. In a way, it had been painful to witness, mainly because Kuina herself never gave up. It was as if the tables had been turned. Kuina training hard day and night to regain her lost supremacy, Zoro training just as hard to keep ahead. But the timing was ill, because as predicted, Kuina's body was beginning to transition from girl to woman. The natural loss of coordination and clumsiness that came with it spelled doom for her rivalry with Zoro. This came on top of her already pre-existing handicap of being unable to see, making it nigh impossible for her to compete on even footing with Zoro, who was already surpassing all records for the dojo. But it had to be said that in all of the dojo, no one could come close to them, save Koshiro. But for reasons best known to himself, the dojo master never dueled his star students.
My problem is I can't attack,
Kuina confessed one evening as she and Zoro sat on the stairs of the dojo, eating watermelons in slices. It had become something of a ritual for them to discuss the day's fight and new techniques that they had learned. The day's conversation had started with Zoro deciding to name his new double katana slicing move Nigiri. It was a practical name, Kuina thought, even if it did make her feel a little hungry. Trust me, Kuina, you should hear what his demon slash is. Zoro then asked about the name of her attacks, thereupon which something that would have been obvious from the beginning entered his realization. Kuina never attacked. She always waited for her opponent to attack first, then made a counterattack.
Without my opponent attacking, I can't sense where they are. If you've gotten so good at attacking now, when I let you attack first, I'm hard-pressed to defend.
For the first time in a long time, his voice had lost the confidence it had once carried. Zoro looked at her narrowly. You're not thinking of giving up, are you? Kuina flushed, and for a moment she regained her old fire.
As if!
But like a fire without fuel to burn, it died out again.
All the same, it feels like I'm stuck in a rut, and I haven't learned anything much in a long time.
Her companion stayed silent, somewhat at a loss for words. What could he say, after all? He hadn't faced the same obstacles she had. Anything approaching encouragement would be nothing short of patronizing. And the one thing he could do was... I'm still fighting you with everything you've got, you know. So don't expect me to start holding back on you.
I know.
For a moment, she flashed him a brief smile.
And thanks. She sighed heavily. I chose this path as a swordsman. I'm just going to have to suck it up and keep training.
Training only works if you're doing the right thing, Kuina. The both of them jumped and turned around to see Koshiro at the top of the steps. They hadn't realized he had been listening in on their conversation.
Father, what should I be training then?
His spectacles gleamed as he smiled mysteriously. A very special kind of training. Koshiro looked at the two upturned faces, full of curiosity, and smiled even more. Have you ever heard of Ichi, the blind kimono maker? The tea had been poured, and a little sweet cake set out for their visitor. Saito-san was an old customer of Ichi's, and did not rush in to do business. Instead, regaled the two women with tales of his travels as he transported merchandise.
The pirate hunter Zoro, eh?
Ichi-san said as he sipped her tea.
Such an outlandish name that the boy has now.
Saito-san nodded at the kimono maker. He has quite a reputation for himself as a bounty hunter.
Still, a common bounty hunter, not what I thought the cultural star student would end up being.
Yes, I know. I used my rarity voice. Shut up. Kuina tried to ignore the sudden jab at her emotions. It hurt not to be remembered as a star student. But thinking of Zoro made it only worse. She hadn't heard anything of him since he had gone, and he wasn't the type to write. They had both known it then. But that didn't keep her from wondering how far ahead he had gotten. It had almost been 2 years since the day he left the village to become the greatest swordsman in the world. The young man who stood in front of the kimono maker's house had since towered over Kuina in height. Zoro's growth spurt had transformed him, seemingly overnight, from a small, scary upstart to a tall, scary swordsman. His twin katanas slung at his hip, and he walked with an almost staggering confidence that only came with use and limited experience. Since Kuina had taken up apprenticeship at Ichi-chan's, they hadn't sparred. Despite all that, they still met day after day after her day's work. Kuina called it slavery to talk shop. As for the reason why they didn't spar anymore, Ichi had been against the idea.
No apprentice of mine is going to be distracted from her work,
Ichi said as he solemnly declared,
If you want to learn what I'm going to teach you, you follow my way, or not at all.
Kuina had almost walked out then, but a word with her father had convinced her that what Ichi could give her was worth putting aside her dream for a few years to attain. And she willed it. The apprenticeship need not to be permanent anyway. It had been hard. Ichi was not an easy master to please, and he had insisted on controlling much of what Kuina was allowed to do, down to the way she dressed. Certain sorts were not acceptable wear for a kimono's apprentice, the old woman said. Kuina was a girl and should be dressing like one, and it was a disgrace that a girl should run around with clothes meant for a boy, and so on and so forth. So, in the blink of an eye, gone were the old, comfortable sporting clothes that she used to wear, and in came a plethora of long robes and feminine wraps in their stead. It had to be admitted Zoro had done a double take when he had seen her wearing them. You really do look like a girl now.
And you look like an absolute idiot,
had been Kuina's, after she had pounded him a few lumps in the head in response. Zoro had learned quickly to never tease her regarding this change again. So, how are you holding up?
Well, Ichi-san is strict, and she fusses out about these stupid things, and I can't practice my sword fighting, and I have to do sewing,
Kuina complained as she exhibited her fingers, blotchy with red spots where her needle had missed a mark.
If she insists I keep doing it, I'll be able to sew without having to depend on sight. It's ridiculous!
Do you really believe it could be done?
Sew without seeing?
Kuina looked thoughtful for a while.
I don't know, Zoro. When I think about it, it just seems impossible, but...
The old hag can do it?
Yes, Ichi-chan can do it, and she's blind, just like me. She walks around this place, no cane, no guys, nothing, yet she always seems to know where everything is and what exactly is going on. If she can see...
They sat in silence for a while. It almost seemed like old times again, minus the watermelon slices. Kuina, I came here to tell you something. She knew it had been coming for a while.
You're leaving.
It was not a question, but a statement. I may have vowed to be the greatest swordsman in the world, Zoro explained, as if he needed reminding. And I found out the other day the greatest swordsman in the world is this guy called Hawkeye's Mihawk.
What a name.
She mumbled, trying not to sound jealous. He's out there in the Grand Line somewhere, Kuina, and I'm going to find him. and I'm going to defeat him.
Imprisoned by the Marines?
Yes, it seems that he ran afoul of Captain Morgan on Celltown Marine Base. They have him there. Saito's not elaborate further.
But what has he done?
Kuina could not think of any reason for it. Granted, Zoro could be an idiot sometimes, but it's assumed something that brought him into such terrible trouble with the Marines. Wasn't being a bounty hunter at least working for the for the side of the law? Attacked Captain's son, apparently.
Thought the boy was smarter than that,
Izzy commented, but even as her voice disapproval, her sightless eyes were focused on Kuina, as if gauging a response.
Does Koshiro know?
Not yet. It gets worse. Last I heard, they were planning on executing him. Kuina nearly dropped her teacup.
So, you're leaving today?
Zoro came to say goodbye for the last time, before he set out on his great journey. Kuina tried to be happy for him. If Zoro hadn't been as obtuse emotionally as he was, he might have noticed her act was not altogether convincing. Are you sure you don't want to come along? It'd be great to have another sparring partner again. The offer was tempting, but Kuina shook her head.
I'm only beginning to learn what I need to from Ichi-san. I'm on the cusp of understanding of how she does it. It'd be a waste of the past few years if I left now.
I understand. The wind blew. They heard the flapping of hung fabrics drying in the sun. In that case, goodbye, Kuina. See you out there. Remember, you promised. As he turned to leave, Kuina watched him go, her heart burning with both regret and envy, and something else.
Zoro, wait!
She didn't know what possessed her to do it. As he ran into her room and out again, in her arms she carried something wrapped in a white cloth. Wordlessly, she handed it to puzzled Zoro. He unwrapped it to reveal her white katana, the meito that was hers to inherit. The Wado Ichimoji.
Zoro-kun, take this with you.
Zoro's eyes widened. Kuina, why are you giving this to me? Years of training had honed her perception of the intangible, and she immediately realized the misdirection Zoro's thoughts had taken.
It's not because I have feelings for you or anything like that, baka!
She said with an exasperated whack on Zoro's head. My shipping senses are tingling! This greatly relieved the moss-headed youth. It wasn't that Zoro wasn't fond of Kuina, but she was more like a sister to him, and if she had suddenly gone all musty and emotional, he wasn't sure how to handle it.
It's just that, well, I'm afraid, Zoro.
Kuina confessed. Sensing his puzzlement, she elaborated further.
I'm afraid of becoming too comfortable here. Ichi-san is teaching me a lot. I'm learning a lot. I know this place so well now, I don't feel helpless. Everyone accepts who they think I am, and even I...
She trailed off, as disturbed by her own happiness.
I'm afraid of becoming too contented. Of becoming contented and happy, and having that will make me forget that I want to be the greatest swordsman in the world.
But why give me the katana? Are you giving up?
No!
Kuina struggled for the right words to say.
It's hard to explain. It's like this, okay? That katana is my most precious possession. It's been in my family for generations. The only way I could be sure I'm going to take the plunge and go after you when I'm ready is if I send my katana ahead with you first. Then I have no choice but to force myself to leave this place and go claim it back when the time is right.
You may have promised.
You may have promised to be the world's greatest swordsman, Zoro. When you do become the greatest, and I'll just have to find you and defeat you to get that title and get my katana back. If you don't make it, I'll have to find the person who beat you and then get the katana from them and become the greatest swordsman in the world. Either way, if I'm going to fulfill my dream, my katana has to go with you now.
Zoro looked at her for a moment, then nodded, slung the katana at his haramaki along with his other two. I'll take good care of it, he promised. Don't take too long.
Don't you dare break it!
She yelled after him, and with a final wave, he was gone.
And, she said softly to herself, if I don't come after you, I don't deserve that katana anyway.
She stood there as Zoro walked into the distance, and wondered when she suddenly sensed his presence veering off the road to the harbor and into a rice field.
Odd,
she muttered to no one in particular.
I didn't know there was a shortcut that way.
Doot! Bomb! Oh, that's Zoro! In the distance, Zoro walked blithely along, deep in thought with his new persistent in hand. Suddenly he looked up and he realized he was in the middle of a vast field with no road in sight.
Where did they move the roads again?
He grumbled.
You're going after him, aren't you? Aren't you?
Itzy-san's eyes were narrowed as she stood in the doorway of Kuina's room and listened to her packing.
You haven't learned everything have to teach you yet, young lady. You know that. We made a promise,
Kuina said, intent on her packing.
Zoro's like a brother to me. If he lets us keep him from being the world's greatest swordsman, it wouldn't be right. And you know, even with what you learned, you'll still have trouble finding your way. It's not the same when it's an unfamiliar face, and the sounds are different. And how are you even going to handle the Marines? I will learn to manage. There's no stopping you, is there?
As he sighed.
But then, there was no stopping me when I left my home island either.
The old lady paused, as if in reverie. Then she smiled.
I've already arranged for Saito-san to give you a gift, as far as Shelltown. Ichi-sama! Make sure you act like a lady. I didn't train you up for nothing, you know.
Goodbyes were said and the preparations made. Even father had understood and given his blessing. Saito-san was very good about it, and kept asking her if she was uncomfortable, and made sure that her luggage and parasol that Itzy-san had insisted she bring with her was safely in the middle of the cart, and not to hesitate to tell him if she needed anything. As Kuina sat on the counter of his cart, and waiting for Saito to start, the spirit of adventure was beginning to course through her veins. She was off at last.
You better not die before I get there, Zoro,
she thought as the cart jolted along the dusty village road.
Or I'm going to be really annoyed.
And with that, Kuina, formerly the kimono maker's apprentice and now traveling traveler, faced back for the last time at the house where poles upon poles of brightly colored silk fluttered in the breeze. And I think we'll stop there. And now it's time for the review. As for possible continuation, yeah, I might continue this at one point. Maybe in a distant Fandom Fridays, if I feel the urge to, I'll do some more chapters of this. Why? Because, well, this is a really good alternate universe fanfic. I mean, I suppose we've all had our theories about Tashigi, right? And I suppose we've all thought, what if? What if Kuina never died? What if Kuina hit her head? Because, well, if you remember back in the days of 4Kids made that stupid lie. Oh, well, a bunch of rivals from another dojo came by and beat Kuina so badly she's been hospitalized and will never be able to fight again. To which we can all say, bull crud, because one, there ain't no way that a bunch of nobodies from a little dojo is going to come by and be able to beat Kuina. Two, Kuina wouldn't give up that easily. And three, there ain't no way Kuina's going to lose. So, this fic kind of takes that little premise that 4Kids gave out and turns it on its head. She becomes blind thanks to an accident, but she doesn't let that stop her. And I get images of Saito Ichi, the blind swordsman, from this, but I also like the fact that with a little help from Zoro, she gets pushed. She becomes stronger. And Kuina feels like her own character like this. Even though we only have a little bit of her from the first episode, from her few episodes, we see her grow and become a better swordsman. We see that she's snarky, kind of tomboyish, and just a little bit, well, Zoro-like. I also like the fact that Zoro's completely in character throughout all this. Hard-headed, dumb, but it's got a never give up spirit that you can just admire. I also love the fact that Zoro really tried his best to be skilled at something new for her. Not for himself, but for her. He wanted his sparring partner back. No, more importantly, he wanted his friend back. He wanted his friend to achieve his dream. And, well, what do we call that, folks? True friends who'll never leave you? We only have one word for it. Nakama. And that is what Zoro stood for. And I also love the integration of other plots from the show proper into the story. And also, the descriptions are just beautiful. and I really feel like I'm watching a small bit of an episode. Another comment that I really enjoy, another part of the story that I've been enjoying is just the mere fact that Kuina is a very strong and independent woman, but she doesn't need to be sexed up, and of course, she doesn't need to be Little Miss Damsel in Distress. Nope, she's Kuina through and through. And some of these OCs are kind of interesting. They're not overbearing, and they leave Kuina to be fully realized. Now, as unusual for this show, this particular chapter's got some Q&A. Alex Cratagus writes, I love how you brought the Black Hour band into the story. It makes sense. Thanks. I've often wondered about the bandana myself. Oda hasn't explained it yet, so I figured it would be fun to come up with an explanation of my own. Flare Knight wrote, seeing the flashback of her made it clear that her dying was just too tragic. Sure, the world is full of that, but it doesn't mean I prefer to have her survived. I often thought about it. It was just a shame that Kuina died just like that. I liked her character a lot. I'm still curious to see what role Tashiki is going to play in her whole uncanny resemblance to Kuina thing. It's going to be even more interesting if Kuina hadn't died now. Infinite Freedom writes, will Kuina be joining the Straw Hats? At present, I don't have any plans for it. And I'm just going to add this to the fic here. I'd like to point out about Kuina's death. We only heard she broke her neck. We haven't seen a body yet. I mean, Belmare, yeah, we see her corpse. Here Luke is nuked. But as far as I'm concerned, if I'm not seeing a body on that, if I'm not seeing a body there, Kuina, there's a chance. At least until the story's over. Well, till next time, I'm probably going to do another Sailor Moon fic. Please tell me it's a cool. I mean, what would you guys like me to do? I probably will do a good fic. I'll probably do a fanfic. Hey, Trixie. What have some of the people around here been wanting? Oh, they want you to do another Von Doom fanfic, namely the sequel to Death of Sailor Moon. Oh well, that seems the what? The sequel to Death of Sailor Moon. You know, Von Doom's Hercules and Xena crossover. Oh my Celestia!